There are certain memories that, even decades later, still feel as vivid as if they had happened only yesterday. They are moments that leave imprints not only on the mind but also on the heart, shaping the way we see ourselves and the world around us. For me, one of those defining memories began in my teenage years during the 1960s and 70s, a time when culture itself was in flux and personal expression was starting to blossom in ways that felt both rebellious and liberating. I grew up in the shadow of the British musical invasion, the Beatles, the Dave Clark Five, and countless others whose sounds dominated the airwaves and reshaped the culture. Alongside their music came something that, for a teenager like me, was just as revolutionary. Longer hairstyles for men were not only tolerated, but celebrated. That small societal shift gave me a window of opportunity to wear my hair longer without constant conflict at home, though my parents would occasionally remind me to keep it neat. Their focus was on tidiness rather than strict conformity, and while they might not have been fully enthusiastic about the trend, they didn't stop me either. In that space of relative freedom, I discovered something more profound about myself, something that until then I had been quietly guarding in the deepest part of my being. Like many adolescents, I was curious, restless, and searching for identity, though my path wasn't quite like most of my peers. Beneath the surface of school life, homework, and the everyday expectations of a son growing up in a conventional household, there was a quiet yearning inside me, a fascination with clothing, textures, and expressions that were considered for women rather than for men. The first time I slipped into my mother's room and discovered her collection of lingerie, I felt as if I had crossed into an entirely different world. The fabrics were impossibly soft, delicate, and inviting. I remember the nervous excitement in my hands as I touched them, the almost electric rush of curiosity that ran through me as I dared to try them on. I was no more than 11 or 12 at the time, a boy still learning about the vastness of the world, and yet those early moments carried a sense of wonder that was bigger than anything else I had experienced. To put on those clothes was not only about texture and feel, it was about stepping into a role, a version of myself that felt mysterious yet strangely authentic. Over time, this exploration deepened. I found myself borrowing garments here and there when I knew the house would be empty, carefully replacing them so that nothing would seem out of place. Because my mother's drawers were kept in a rather unorganized state, it was easy enough to ensure that nothing appeared disturbed. This gave me freedom to explore quietly without fear of discovery. At first, it was only occasional and tentative, but as the years went on, I developed my own small collection of items, gathered from distant shops where I wouldn't be recognized. Each piece I acquired, whether it was a satin slip, a pair of stockings, or a blouse, felt like a treasure, a symbol of independence and self-expression that I could call my own. I learned to keep them carefully hidden, tucked away like precious secrets, waiting for those moments when the house was empty and I could step into that other self without interruption. As my wardrobe of hidden treasures grew, so too did the rituals surrounding them. I began to understand that clothing was only part of the experience. Preparation mattered just as much. I learned to shave my arms and legs, smoothing my skin so that the fabrics would rest against me in the way I imagined they should. I even experimented with depilatory creams, sometimes with mixed success, but always with the goal of achieving that sensation of complete transformation. The feeling of silk or satin against freshly smooth skin is almost indescribable. It is as though every nerve wakes up and the body remembers something it had long forgotten. Each time I dressed in this way, I felt not only different in appearance, but different in spirit, as if stepping into a fuller, more complete version of myself. One of the fantasies that returned to me again and again during those years was the idea of going to a beauty salon. In my mind, it was not simply about getting a haircut or a trim, which boys my age sometimes dreaded. It was about the ritual of being pampered, of sitting in that chair while a stylist carefully arranged my hair into something soft, polished, and undeniably feminine. I had tried, in private, to recreate the look myself by setting my hair in rollers, but my inexperience and lack of patience left me frustrated. The rollers would never sit tightly enough, or the sections would come loose, and the end result was always a mess rather than the smooth, glossy style I imagined. It became clear to me that if I ever wanted to live out this fantasy, I would have to trust someone skilled, someone who could see me not just as another young man with longish hair, but as a person yearning for something different. That opportunity came a few years later when I was away at college. I'd managed to keep my hair at a respectable length, not wild or unkempt, but long enough to carry that air of freedom popularized by pop singers of the day. While some of my peers favored a messy look, I had been raised with the insistence that appearances mattered, and so I kept it clean, brushed, and presentable. My parents' voices echoed in my head whenever I looked in the mirror. Always neat, always tidy. That balance between rebellion and respectability meant that my hair was long enough for my fantasies, but not so long that it would invite constant criticism. It was during my first weeks of college that I discovered a small row of shops just a few blocks from my apartment. There were convenience stores, a laundromat, a cafe or two, and, most strikingly, a beauty salon with a sign that read, "A New Woman Beauty Salon." The very name seemed to call out to me, as though the universe had placed it there deliberately. From the moment I saw it, I began walking past whenever I could, slowing my steps just enough to glance through the windows and watch the stylists at work. Women sat in chairs with rollers in their hair, dryers humming, stylists fussing with brushes and sprays, and all of it created an atmosphere that felt magical to me. I would keep my pace steady, careful not to linger too long or stare too obviously, but inside, I was captivated. The thought of being inside that space, of experiencing it for myself, was overwhelming. At first, it was only a distant dream. I would walk by, steal a glance, and then continue on, convincing myself that it was impossible, that it was too risky, that no one would ever agree to what I wanted. And yet, the fantasy grew stronger the more I saw it. I began to imagine scenarios, what it would feel like to walk in, what words I might use, how it might sound to ask for a simple shampoo and set. Each detail played over and over in my mind, until one September afternoon, the dream became too powerful to ignore. I remember the day with absolute clarity. Classes were done, and I was alone in my apartment. I had dressed myself in some of my favorite pieces, soft fabrics, carefully chosen, hidden beneath my everyday clothes. To anyone outside, I looked like an ordinary student in jeans, a shirt, and loafers. But inside, I felt transformed. That duality, the ordinary exterior and the secret, extraordinary interior, gave me courage, as if I was carrying a hidden talisman of confidence. As I sat with my book spread out in front of me, I realized I couldn't focus. The urge to finally step into the salon was too strong, and the thought of delaying it any longer seemed unbearable. So I stood, gathered my resolve, and walked out the door. The streets felt both familiar and strange, as though the world had shifted slightly in anticipation of what I was about to do. Each step toward the salon echoed with both excitement and fear. I slowed as I approached, walking past once, my heart pounding so loudly I thought someone might hear it. Through the window, I noticed that the salon was quiet, no customers in sight, only the calm order of chairs and mirrors waiting for activity. I kept going, forcing myself to take a second lap around the block, whispering silent arguments with myself. You can't do this. Yes, you can. It will be fine. No, it's too much. Finally, on my second pass, I stopped at the door. My hand hovered near the handle, trembling slightly, and then, almost without realizing it, I pushed the door open. The scent of shampoos, lotions, and sprays immediately enveloped me. that unmistakable fragrance of a beauty salon that mixes cleanliness with something glamorous, almost theatrical. A small bell chimed as the door closed behind me, announcing my arrival to whoever might be inside. I stood near the front desk, nervous, unsure of how to begin, but determined not to turn back. A few moments later, a woman emerged from the back, her presence calm yet confident. She was in her 20s with neatly styled blonde hair and a welcoming smile that softened some of the tension in my chest. She introduced herself as Tina, the stylist, and asked how she could help me. For a few seconds, the words caught in my throat. I must have looked uncertain, maybe even a little lost. But then, in a halting voice, I asked if it would be possible to get a shampoo and set. Her eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise, but instead of dismissing me, she studied me for a moment and then said gently that it was absolutely fine. There was no judgment in her tone, only curiosity and perhaps a touch of amusement. My relief was immediate, though my nerves still buzzed. She told me she had no other appointment scheduled and would be glad to help. Then she asked my name, and I replied with the one I used every day, though inside I felt that a different name might have fit the moment better. And with that, she motioned for me to follow her, and I did, each step carrying me deeper into the experience I had imagined for so many years, an experience that was no longer fantasy, but finally unfolding in reality. The moment I followed Tina into the back of the salon, I felt a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation, like standing on the threshold of a door I had imagined all my life, but never dared to walk through until that very afternoon. The soft hum of dryers in the background, the gleam of polished mirrors reflecting row upon row of chairs, and the neat arrangement of tools and bottles on her workstation. All of it felt both ordinary and magical. To any regular customer, it would have been simply the expected atmosphere of a beauty salon. To me, however, it was a dreamscape, a place that had existed in my imagination for years, now unfolding in real time. Tina guided me toward the reclining shampoo chair, her manner brisk yet kind, and invited me to sit down. As I lowered myself into the chair, the sound of the vinyl creaking beneath me seemed louder than usual, magnified by my heightened awareness of every little detail. When she turned the collar of my shirt to protect it from getting wet, I realized how close her movements brought her to me, how natural and practiced her gestures were. A tissue was placed around my neck, followed by the snap of a plastic cape draped lightly over me. Suddenly, I was cocooned in the unmistakable trappings of the salon ritual. It may sound like a small thing, but for me, that cape was transformative. It wasn't just fabric. It was permission. It was belonging. It was the signal that I was now a participant in this world rather than a silent observer peeking through a window. My heart raced as she leaned me back gently until my neck rested comfortably against the cool curve of the shampoo bowl. Above me, the lights gleamed softly, and I felt my anticipation rise like a tide. Then came the water, warm and soothing, running through my hair as Tina adjusted the faucet to the perfect temperature. The first touch of her fingers massaging the shampoo into my scalp nearly made me melt into the chair. It was impossible not to relax as she worked. Slow, circular motions that carried both professionalism and gentleness, as if she understood that this was not just about cleaning hair, but about giving someone a moment of peace and care. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to be in this very position, and now here I was, eyes closed, the scent of shampoo filling the air, the rhythmic sound of running water blending with the quiet hum of dryers in the distance. It was more than pleasant. It was transcendent, a moment of being cared for without judgment. When she finished rinsing and conditioning my hair, Tina wrapped a towel around my head and helped me sit upright again. Her voice carried a lightness, as though she wanted to put me at ease. With casual curiosity, she asked whether I might prefer to be addressed by another name while in her salon, perhaps something more fitting to the atmosphere we were creating. Her suggestion caught me off guard at first. I hadn't prepared for such a question, but her tone was warm, free of mockery, and the thought of having a different name, a name that aligned more closely with the version of myself I longed to express, filled me with an unexpected thrill. I told her she could call me Judy, a name she suggested with a smile, and in that instant something subtle shifted. It was as if, for the first time, someone else was acknowledging not just the hidden self I carried, but affirming it aloud, making it real. She led me from the shampoo station to her styling chair, positioning me carefully and clipping a fresh towel across my shoulders. As she began sectioning my damp hair, combing through it with precision, she asked me small conversational questions about my life, whether I was a student, what I was studying, if I lived nearby. Her tone was professional but friendly, a balance of small talk and sincere curiosity. Each question helped dissolve the nervousness I had brought with me, and slowly I began to relax, realizing that she saw me as a client, not as an oddity. When she asked why I wanted to have my hair set here, in this particular salon, I hesitated for a moment and then admitted that it was something I had imagined for a long time, a personal dream that went beyond practicality. To my relief, she nodded as though such a desire was perfectly valid, treating it with respect rather than ridicule. The rollers came next. She worked methodically, taking small sections of hair, winding them smoothly, securing each with a clip, and moving on to the next. I could feel the slight tug as she pulled each section taut before rolling it, the click of metal clips locking them into place. One by one, the curlers covered my head, a crown of transformation taking shape. Watching the process in the mirror was surreal. With each roller added, I felt further from the everyday self who had walked in nervously off the street and closer to the image of myself that had lived so long in my imagination. The cape, the towel, the rollers, they were simple objects, yet together they formed the costume of a character I had always longed to play. When she was done, Tina asked whether I would like to sit under the dryer while the set took hold. I agreed, and she led me to one of the large dome-shaped dryers that I had often seen from afar, but never dared to approach. She adjusted the seat, placed a light net over my rollers, and lowered the hood. A switch clicked, and a steady hum filled my ears as warm air surrounded my head. Sitting there, wrapped in the cape, hair securely set beneath the dryer, I felt an extraordinary blend of vulnerability and empowerment. Vulnerability because I was so clearly immersed in a ritual often associated with femininity, and empowerment because I had chosen this, embraced it, and was now living it fully. For the first time, I wasn't pretending alone in a locked room. I was participating openly in the world I had admired from the outside. As the dryer buzzed gently, Tina busied herself with a small manicure table she had rolled over beside me. She asked lightly if I would enjoy having my nails shaped while I waited, and though the suggestion startled me at first, I soon realized how perfectly it aligned with the experience. I nodded, and she set to work. My hands were soaked, then filed and cleaned with careful attention. There was no rush, no sense of impatience, only the steady, calming rhythm of someone taking time to make another person feel cared for. Looking down at my neatly shaped nails, I felt another surge of quiet joy. It wasn't about polish or embellishment yet. It was about the act itself, the transformation of detail, the reminder that every part of me could be tended to with dignity. When the dryer finally clicked off, Tina raised the hood and checked my hair, nodding approvingly. She led me back to her station, turning my chair so that I faced away from the mirror. "No peeking until I'm done," she said playfully, and I obeyed, heart racing with anticipation. With gentle hands, she removed each roller, combed through the curls, and began shaping them into a soft, styled form. I could feel her comb and brush gliding through my hair, hear the occasional spritz of setting lotion or hairspray, sense the final touches being made to bring the vision together. There was something ceremonial in the way she worked, as though she understood that this was more than a hairstyle. It was a rite of passage, a revelation. At last, she pronounced her work finished. She had me cover my eyes briefly with a towel as she applied the final mist of hairspray, then turned the chair slowly toward the mirror. When I removed the towel, I gasped. The reflection staring back at me was familiar, yet astonishingly new. My hair framed my face with softness, styled in a way I had never seen on myself before, bangs falling gracefully across my forehead. Though no makeup had yet been applied, the overall effect was unmistakably feminine. For a moment, I sat in stunned silence, scarcely able to believe the transformation. It wasn't that I looked like someone else. It was that I looked like a version of myself I had always imagined, but never thought I could see so clearly in reality. Tina watched my reaction with a knowing smile. "So, Judy," she asked, "what do you think?" My voice was quiet when I finally managed to answer, but every word was filled with gratitude. I told her she had done an incredible job, that I had never felt so affirmed, so complete. She nodded, pleased, and said gently that everyone deserves to feel good about themselves, to see in the mirror a reflection that brings joy. Her words were simple, yet they struck me deeply. The experience might have ended there, but Tina, sensing how much this meant to me, offered to enhance the transformation further with a touch of makeup. At first, I hesitated. Makeup had always seemed like a line I could not cross, an area too bold, too revealing. Yet sitting in that chair, still cloaked in the cape, hair freshly styled, I realized that hesitation no longer made sense. I nodded and she retrieved a small kit. Step by step, she applied foundation, powder, a hint of blush, a sweep of mascara, and finally a shade of lipstick that complemented the softness of my hairstyle. With each brushstroke, the person in the mirror became more luminous, more alive. When she finally set her tools aside and let me look again, I was overcome. The person staring back at me was undeniably me, yet transformed into a vision I had always longed for. There was a softness in the lines of my face, a brightness in my eyes, a confidence that had been hidden but was now undeniable. For the first time in my life, I saw reflected not just who I was expected to be, but who I could be. It was as if the mirror itself had opened to reveal a truer self, one that had been waiting patiently for this very day. Walking out of the salon that evening was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. The air outside felt crisper, more charged, as though the world had shifted into sharper focus. Streetlights had just begun to flicker on, casting warm pools of golden light across the pavement, and every reflection I caught of myself in shop windows seemed to carry a new weight. I had entered that salon nervously, uncertain of whether I would even have the courage to ask for a simple shampoo, and set. Yet I was leaving with my hair freshly styled, my nails carefully shaped, and my face touched with the subtle artistry of makeup. More importantly, I was leaving with a name, Judy, that had been spoken aloud with kindness and respect, a name that no longer belonged only to my private fantasies, but had found its place in the real world. Each step I took away from the salon felt like a step into a new chapter of my life, one that would be filled with both promise and challenge. The most remarkable part of the experience was not the physical transformation, though that, in itself, had been astounding. It was the way the transformation had made me feel inside, whole, authentic, seen. For years, I had carried this longing in secret, unsure whether anyone would ever accept it, fearful that if the truth slipped out, it would invite only ridicule or rejection. Yet here was someone, a professional in her own space, who had not only accepted my desire but encouraged it, even celebrated it. That validation was a gift I had never expected to receive, and it left me feeling lighter, more hopeful than I had in a very long time. I remember pausing on the sidewalk outside the salon, almost unwilling to break the spell, simply breathing in the night air and trying to memorize every sensation. The faint scent of hairspray clinging to me, the soft feel of styled bangs brushing against my forehead, the quiet strength that came from knowing I had dared to step beyond fear. As I walked back toward my apartment, I couldn't help but reflect on the long road that had brought me here. From those first tentative moments in my mother's room as a child, when curiosity had led me to try on her garments, to the years of secrecy and hidden treasures carefully tucked away, to the countless times I had walked past the salon window, wishing, but never acting. Each piece of the journey now seemed to converge in this one afternoon. The transformation I carried on the outside was only a reflection of the deeper transformation taking place within, the gradual shedding of shame and the beginning of acceptance. I realized, with a clarity I had never had before, that these desires were not something strange or wrong. They were simply a part of who I was, a part that deserved acknowledgement rather than denial. Back in the quiet of my apartment, I caught sight of myself again in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked both familiar and foreign, her expression filled with a mixture of joy, disbelief, and quiet pride. I touched my hair gently, feeling the firmness of the set, and then traced the curve of my freshly shaped nails. The makeup, subtle yet undeniable, gave my face a softness that almost startled me. For a long while, I simply stood there, moving slightly from angle to angle, absorbing the reality of the reflection. It was no longer a fantasy flickering in my imagination. It was me, present and tangible. I had proof that the person I longed to be could exist not just behind closed doors, but out in the world, under the hands of a professional who treated me with dignity. That thought filled me with a sense of gratitude so deep I could hardly put it into words. The days that followed were suffused with a quiet glow. Ordinary routines, walking to class, studying in the library, running errands, were all subtly altered by the knowledge of what I had experienced. Beneath the surface of my everyday student life, there was now a secret reservoir of strength, drawn from the memory of sitting in that salon chair and watching the mirror reveal a truer version of myself. Whenever I felt anxious or uncertain, I could close my eyes and return to that moment, hear Tina's voice addressing me as Judy, feel the rollers being gently unwound, see the astonishment in my own reflection. That memory was like a touchstone, reminding me that authenticity was not only possible, but within reach. What struck me most was how the experience had changed my relationship with the idea of secrecy. Before, my hidden self had been something I carried almost like a burden, a weight that required constant vigilance to protect. Now, however, it felt less like a secret and more like a treasure, something precious that I could reveal in safe spaces, something that deserved care rather than concealment. I still knew the world outside might not always understand, that there would be people who would dismiss or condemn, but I also knew, with equal certainty, that acceptance was possible, that there were those who could see me as I wished to be seen and would honor that truth. That knowledge alone gave me a newfound resilience. In the weeks that followed, I returned to the salon. Each visit carried its own rhythm, its own moments of joy, but the first experience remained the most profound, like a door opening for the very first time. Tina became more than a stylist. She became a confidant, someone who not only tended to my outer appearance, but also nurtured the inner courage it took to keep stepping forward. She spoke to me with kindness, encouraged me to pursue my studies diligently, and reminded me that while embracing my identity was important, so too was building a life that balanced every aspect of who I was. Her wisdom anchored me, helping me to see that my journey was not about abandoning one part of myself for another, but about weaving them together into a fuller whole. Each appointment built on the last, layering not just polish and style, but confidence and self-assurance. The rituals of the salon, sitting under the dryer, feeling the comb glide through freshly set curls, watching as subtle touches of makeup reshaped the reflection in the mirror, became more than cosmetic practices. They became affirmations, small ceremonies of self-respect that reminded me of the value of care, of presentation, of taking the time to honor oneself. These moments taught me that beauty was not merely surface deep. It was a language, a way of expressing inner truths outwardly, a bridge between how I felt inside and how the world might perceive me. Looking back now, with the clarity of hindsight, I can see just how pivotal that first visit was. It marked the turning point between fear and courage, between dreaming and doing. Without it, I might have spent years more confined to secrecy, forever wondering what it might feel like to be fully acknowledged. Instead, I was given the chance to step into that acknowledgement, to see with my own eyes that the reflection I longed for was not only possible, but already within me, waiting to be revealed. That knowledge has stayed with me ever since, guiding me through the many twists and turns that life inevitably brings. The memory of leaving the salon that day, of walking back through the streets with styled hair and a quiet smile, remains one of the most empowering experiences of my life. It wasn't about glamour or vanity. It was about truth, about daring to embrace a side of myself that had long been hidden in shadows. Every time I recall it, I'm reminded of the courage it took to step through that door, and of the kindness of a woman who chose to respond with empathy rather than judgment. Those two elements, courage and kindness, remain to this day the foundation of the journey I continue to walk. In the end, what mattered most was not simply that I had my hair styled, or my nails shaped, or my face touched with makeup. What mattered was the way those outward changes reflected the deeper transformation happening within. I had glimpsed a fuller version of myself, and once seen, it could never be unseen. The experience gave me both the vision and the strength to continue exploring, to keep seeking spaces of acceptance, and to honor the truth of who I was. That is the true gift of that day, a gift that continues to shape me long after the details of rollers and capes have faded. And so, as I think back on it now, I realize that the name of the salon, A New Woman, was more than just a sign above a door. It was a promise, one that had been fulfilled in ways I could never have anticipated. I walked in with hesitation, carrying years of longing and uncertainty, and I walked out feeling renewed, affirmed, and alive in a way I had only dared to imagine. For the rest of my life, I will carry that truth with me, that sometimes the most ordinary doors, the ones we pass by every day, can open into extraordinary transformations, if only we find the courage to step through.